That we are not live streaming on Facebook due to a scheduling conflict. And right now we don't have anyone in attendance watching our meeting, but this meeting will be recorded. And oh, just a sec. Okay. I'm wondering if someone's having. John, can you send Juliana a invitation? Okay. Okay, so I want to thank Chief Kroll for joining us tonight to help us go through these policies. I know everyone at the Town of Manlius Police Department is busy with the CALIA accreditation review, and I appreciate everyone's time. So before we jump into the policies, I just have 3 things to cover. Usually I like to start the meeting by going around and checking in with everyone. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do that this meeting. So I just want to remind everyone, if you do find that you're talking a lot during our discussion, which is great, but also just remember to step back a little bit and make sure everyone else has time also to speak. And I'll do my best to make sure I'm watching for anyone's hands. So if anyone does want to speak, that I am trying to watch, okay? The second thing is next Thursday, October 22nd at 6:30, our police department will be doing a virtual informational presentation on some of the questions we received. And after that presentation, we will have some time for Q&A. And I think this is a great way for us to hear from our police department as well as the community. And I do again want to thank Chief Kroll for all his help with the presentation. And so once that presentation happens, I do think we potentially will have everything we need to start building and going through and start building our plan. We could do this by working in small groups and hearing suggestions, ideas, and we'll start that process in a couple weeks. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we can tackle that after our policy discussion tonight. We're going to try to check in around 8 o'clock. And then the last thing I wanted to check in with everyone before we begin is on the agenda. Did anyone have any questions, additions, subtractions from the agenda? Jim?
Yeah, so I'd like to have a little bit of time as we look at policies. We're going to look at them in context.
Okay.
And I've started to look at some of the data, and I think the assumptions we make about the data I've discovered can greatly color the results we get. So I'd rather start with neutral assumptions, and especially I'd like to have the chief's idea about the best way to produce this so that we're actually representing what's going on in the town, not some abstract idea. So I'd like to have a few minutes to just talk about that.
Okay, and so I was thinking of, you would want to do that before we start the discussion on policy.
Yeah, it wouldn't be long, but it would give us a framework then as new policies come up. We could say, oh, then we want to try this approach or that approach. Because it's not an idea that has to do with a specific policy.
Okay. Does anyone else have? Everyone good with that? And everyone, yes? Okay. Hold on, I think someone else might be trying to get in. Oh, okay. Did you resend that link?
At the door?
Okay. So Jim, do you want to go? Go
Sure.
ahead.
Can I share my screen? I didn't try. Yes. Great. Thank you very much. And again, I'll keep this really quick, but I think it'll help us understand. So I looked at the data that you provide us with, Chief, both in, from the CALIA assessments. And I also wanted to look at what's our community look like, from a demographic area. And the problem is CALIA looks at 4 races and 2 sexes. So there's 8 buckets. And Data USA, which is kind of the gold standard, looks at 14. So, there's not an exact match, but it's pretty straightforward, I think, to be able to say, if we just don't worry about sex and say white is white, black is black, all Hispanic are Hispanic because they have subcategories for Hispanic and everything else is other, then it's a straightforward match. And I also was able to get 2017 data, so it would match the data that was come from CALIA. The question is, what racial mix do we use? And I think that's actually a very important question, because it can be very different depending upon what we're doing. So, if we look at the Manlius racial mix, it's 87% white and other things, but there's different racial mixes in the city and the county. So, we have to decide what's the most relevant for us. And it may be more relevant, a different model may be different for like break-ins as opposed to traffic. These are things you can tell us about. But if I were to look at what CALIA told us, it said, okay, most of the traffic warnings and citations were to white people. We'd expect that, but we don't know whether that's in proportion or out of proportion, given who the people are. And I'll tell you, the first thing I did sent me down the wrong track. And I said, well, let's just compare it to Manlius. And if we just look at the town of Manlius, well, then you're 3 times more likely to get a warning if you're black versus white, and 4 times if you're to get a citation. And I circulated that with some of the people, and they said, but is that really a fair mix? And I think that's a good question. Is that a fair mix or not? So what I did was I built a couple of simulations to say, well, what's the mix between either the Syracuse metropolitan area or the county, right? And how many people do we think are coming in from the county, for example, that would be part of those statistics? And if I make it all Manlius here, we can see again that blacks get a really high percentage, 3 or 4 times as much as white. But if I just say, wait a minute, let's say 10% of the people are coming from Onondaga County, all right, as a county, well, then all of a sudden it looks pretty good, so I think we have to challenge our own assumptions about the data, so that when we're looking at it, we're giving Manlius an accurate shake in terms of what the population is that we're dealing with. Likewise, if I do it with Syracuse instead of the county, we end up with an even better, because there's more blacks in Syracuse than there are in counties. So, these are things that I don't want to play a game with data and end up skewing the results in a way that push us one way or the other. I'd like to be able to say, here's what we know about our community and the people that the police encounter in their daily work. And then we can start to say, does this seem like it's reasonable or not? We'll still have incidents. We know of incidents where people have some problems, but that if on the aggregate, it looks pretty good, then we have to say, well, maybe this isn't a systemic thing. Maybe this is some individuals. I don't want to put any answers out there till we understand how we want to look at the data you've given us. So again, it may be different for traffic versus this, that, or the other thing. And we would need your guidance to tell us who's the population you're dealing with in these kinds of circumstances. So that's the whole thing. Does that make sense? Answer questions about that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, I don't want to jump to any conclusions. That's the whole point. I want to say, but you've given us data. That's what we should be one of the things we should be working with. But let's work with it from the right side. Yeah.
I do have a question.
Sure.
And thank you for all the data. When a citation or an incident is happening with law enforcement and someone that allegedly is breaking the law, is it written down whether they're black, white, Hispanic on the summons? How is that data compiled?
Sure.
1, and 2, isn't that not offensive, but not illegal either, discriminatory. You know,
Chief would have to answer that. I have no idea. I know this is the data I got
yeah,
from
no,
town. Yeah,
that, I get it.
Yeah.
But it's almost reverse discrimination by virtue of the fact you're singling out different ethnicities, albeit different races.
Are we good with the screen? Can we come back
yeah.
to see everything?
Unless people have something else they want to see, but the main point here is I can jigger those percentages any way we want, as you know, and I'd like to be informed what's the best way to do that, so that we're now not stuck in it's one thing or the other. It can be a combination thereof. But yeah.
Okay. So kind of getting that, the demographics, but demographics of what?
Right.
Chief, do you have any thoughts?
There's only three things that I took note of. First, this data is vehicle and traffic stops only. Doesn't have anything to do with any other offense that we arrest on. We arrest 600 people a year, but we don't really keep data on what their race is. Secondly, of course, it's data driven, but the reality is that we don't have the ability to collect the accurate data that you're looking for in order to make a proper assumption.
Okay.
Because I like the idea that you're looking at Onondaga County statistics, because it certainly skews the numbers when you compare that to Manlius, because we don't stop just Manlius residents. In fact, we don't even ask. In fact, that's kind of like my third point is that you can only ask so many questions during a traffic stop, and one of them is not residency.
Sure.
So it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. So it's really hard to be able to get the data to make an accurate assumption based on data, because it's always going to be skewed in one way or the other.
Does anyone else have comments?
If I could just follow up with a question. So, Chief, the data you gave us has all that racial information in it. So, you know, that came from somewhere, and you know, I wouldn't know whether to say it's good, bad, or indifferent. So you're saying that we shouldn't be looking at that data? Is that, I just want to understand what you want us to do with that data.
It's not what I said,
To
Jim.
us, so I want to know how to use it. Yeah.
That's not what I said, Jim. I just said that we only collect data on traffic stops.
Oh, okay. So you don't, and again, this was the first data set that I was given. So that's the only one I could look at. So is this the only data set that has that information in?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to talk about policy? So I didn't receive many questions, so it was kind of hard to know where to begin. So I thought we would just go in order, if that made sense. So I mean, I'm really looking for your guidance on here. But so the first order, the general order, is the agency's role and authority. So does anyone have any comments or questions about that particular policy? And again, if we want to change it up, if we need to switch format, I'm open to anything, but I'm just going to open it for comments right now, if that makes any sense.
I don't mean to. So what are we trying to do when we review these? Because I think, you know, what outcome would you like from this? My experience with policy, and I've done a lot of federal policy, is that policy is created to solve a problem. And it's hard to review a policy if you don't want to know what problem it's trying to solve and what context it's happening in. So again, I rely on the chief to help us understand that, so that we can, because I don't think we're in the process of critiquing a policy. I hope we're just trying to understand it. But that's my comment. Well,
because I re-looked at one of the New York State guides, and they had, like, right in page 2, they kind of have a bullet point of what we're responsible for, what's our objectives, and in it is review policy, and then if I can bring it up, I had okay. Review policy, and then develop policy recommendations resulting in the review. So to me, it just means I know we need to talk about the policies. That's all I got. Nadine.
I think the policies are very important for people to understand. I think the reality of the situation is that we are tasked to do specific things here, but we can't do them if we don't understand what the town of Manlius police policies are. So I don't think our policies, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, were developed to fix a problem. They were developed so our officers have rules and guidelines to follow.
Mhm.
So I think we should review the policies with that in mind, looking at, oh, do we like this policy? Do we like the fact that the officers are following this guideline? Maybe we don't like the wording here. Maybe we think that the officers should not be following this policy. So I think that is what, when I interpret the guidelines in the handbook, that's what I think they're asking us. So we need to understand what the policies are, perhaps why they were put in place, and are they being followed? I think that's the question. Are they being followed? If we like the policy. If we don't like the policy, then that's what we have to report back on. So yes, I think this is probably the most important part of this.
Anyone else?
Hi, everybody. I just, since no one's saying anything about the rules, I do have internal affairs questions and comments.
Okay.
So whenever you get to that, yeah.
I think that's next. I know that the agency role and authority, I mean, it was a good read to really understand
Yeah,
values.
I think when I put together the kind of initial policies to look at, I know that wasn't in the executive order, but I thought that was a really nice place to start to just kind of give context to everything else. So I can't imagine there's much discussion around that if we just want to move on to internal affairs.
How about this question, Chief? If you could, is there anything in the agency role of authority that maybe the normal citizen not involved in this process would oh, I didn't realize the police department did this or didn't do this? Is there anything like that that kind of sticks out as it relates to the role that the town of Manlius Police Department plays that maybe other departments don't, or that a citizen would expect it to play, but it actually doesn't?
Our policy on role and authority is basically dictated by New York state law. So it really just regurgitates what state law indicates. General municipal law, criminal procedure law, penal law, the 1,000 laws that we follow. And it just dictates who has authority and what their role is in those circumstances. So it's really already dictated by law. State law, federal law, criminal procedure law, hundreds of laws.
So in your professional opinion, our policy is not unique in any way to what one would expect as governed by the New York State?
No, not at all. In fact, when it's reviewed on a regular basis, the reviewers they're not even really familiar with local laws and state laws. So it's not unique in any way. It really just, it makes it simplistic for our officers to understand the volumes and volumes of laws that we have to follow.
Thank you.
So just to follow up on that, because on the annual goals and objectives, it does talk about how they can contribute, the officers can contribute, and you guys can really make your own goals, or your kind of almost like a check-in for the year. I thought that was really good. You're saying that most likely all police agencies would do that?
No, I'm not saying that. We're very unique in that we're accredited by both CALEA and New York State. You'll probably hear me say that. And when you're accredited, you're required to create goals, annual goals, every single year. Okay. So we have annual goals that are created for the specific year, and then we have permanent goals that are always followed throughout each and every year. But not every agency does that. Really, Manlius is unique in that regard.
Chief, is this the same for all the policies that we looked at? Is it all state, from the state, or are some of these specific to the town of Manlius?
Both really. I mean, we enforce local law, which is
Okay.
specific to the town of Manlius, and it's really challenging for us because we're dealing with 4 municipalities within the town of Manlius, the town, and of course all 3 villages. So those are local laws that we enforce, but beyond local law, there's state law, and then there's federal law, and that remains the same for everybody.
Thank you.
Do we
I
want to
guess
go?
I,
Go
do you
ahead.
want me to go on internal affairs? Because I have some questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to give you my questions and feedback. And if there's anything that I'm assuming, just let me know at the end, because I know we want to get through this. So, so one of the things is, I think you all know that I sent an article out about open and closed systems. And it's not just a concern for me about how closed systems limit themselves in terms of progress or adaptability, but also that they can be vulnerable if they're a closed system to not being trusted by, you know, by the community. And that's just an integral part of this conversation. So one of the things I noticed about these policies and procedures is that they're extremely well laid out. And it was very helpful to read these. And in many ways, it was very comforting to read these policies, providing that everyone involved and in power is a good faith actor. So, and we may, in our area, be extremely fortunate that that's our circumstance, right? But I did observe some instances where if there happen to be bad faith actors in a department, that the checks on their power would be very limited. And for example, in the Internal Affairs General Order 211, it says the chief of police shall designate a command member of the department to serve as the internal affairs officer, and the IAO shall be responsible for internal affairs and shall report directly to the chief of police in all matters relating to internal affairs. So to me, sorry, I'm getting bit by a puppy right now. So my puppy's beneath me. Let's see. So essentially what I'm understanding from this is that the chief of police chooses the IAO, and then the IAO reports to the chief of police on internal affairs investigations. And these internal affairs investigations range from like an internal complaint from someone to the use of force. So to me, this is possibly a conflict. It's this idea of the police policing themselves. And it not only creates, if that is the case, a closed feedback loop, preventing some transparency to the public, but also places the police in a vulnerable position of having to make very difficult choices and assessments of what is essentially people who are like their brothers and sisters, right? So that jumped out at me as just one example of what might be a vulnerability in a policy that would leave maybe the police exposed to something, or the public feeling that there isn't accountability on something, if I'm reading it right. But that was the first thing. And then the other things I'd just like to quickly mention are that I noticed, I'm sorry, I'm good. I have a new puppy. So I noticed that there was nothing in the chapters that I saw on specifically COVID and how the police officers are being kept safe, or the public. no mental health specific policies. I did see number 249, which is a respiratory protection guideline that I thought would be interesting to see if maybe there's something included there for COVID being a respiratory illness. I also, internal affairs wise, I'm curious about how, like, what would necessitate a dismissal for an officer? And I thought equal opportunity employment, general order, I think it's 301, would be interesting to maybe answer that question. And then also 321, disciplinary system. I'm guessing that has to do with an internal affairs investigation or something of that sort. So I just wanted to understand those a little bit better. And if my understanding is off, I get that, because I know what I know and I don't know what I don't know. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for being here.
Sally?
I want to follow up on that. I did have a quick question. Again, I may have missed it. And Chief, I want to thank you too for taking the time to be with us tonight. On the pamphlet that was put together about when a person makes a complaint, you know, the whole steps that it goes through and so on, I didn't see any place in there where there would be feedback to the complainant so that they would know how it got settled and what was done. You know, it's some type of communication. And I think that sometimes that's where people feel like, well, it went into the black hole. Now, I may have missed it, but that's what I got from that pamphlet, and that's what got me to question it.
Any other comments on the internal affairs policy? We're very quiet this evening. Oh. Jim, do you want to go?
So we had a specific question about how the complainants, if they're responded to, and if so, how that happens. And so do we get an answer? I mean,
Oh, yeah. When you have an answer, Chief, just go ahead.
Well, like I said, I'm doing a lot of listening, and you're the moderator. So if you want me to address a specific question, I think I wrote down 7 of them in those last 2 things. So which one would you like me to address first? Okay, if you're not going to tell me which, I'll just kind of rattle them off based on my notes, right? So I think the first question I made notes on is internal affairs and General Order 211. And how is it, this is my interpretation of your question. So correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to try to paraphrase here, but I think the question was, is there any other levels of accountability beyond me? And the answer to that is yes. If you understand the process, you understand that all internal affairs are definitely come to me, and I do have a certain level of authority to determine what takes place in the internal affairs. But if for some reason somebody who makes a complaint that they don't like my response, or they're not happy with that response, they can always appeal it to various sources. First would be the town supervisor. Second would be the Attorney General for the state of New York. Prior to the Attorney General would be the District Attorney's Office of Onondaga County. If it's a serious violation, it could be appealed to the FBI. The Federal Bureau of Investigation actually oversees complaints on police departments all throughout the country. There are various levels of appeals that can take place. So even though the policy says the chief will have the final say, because that's more of like a union issue than anything else, there's various levels that where somebody could appeal if they weren't happy with my final decision. So I think that's the first question. The second one is, you kind of threw a little bit of the COVID thing into the 211 internal affairs thing, but I'll address that next because I made a comment. you saw a very limited level of policy procedures that we have at the Town of Manlius Police Department. We have a specific general order on pandemics. I wrote that general order about 15 years ago, and it scared the hell out of me thinking that we would ever have to use it. But it's in place, and it talks all about pandemics and how we protect our police officers, how we protect our community, and the things that we need to do involving a pandemic. And I'm sad to say that we actually had to kick that order into active phase because I never thought we would see a pandemic. But at least we had something in place. At least we had something we could follow, and it really helped us as an organization. In fact, Town of Manlius actually helped a lot of agencies in Onondaga County because they did not have policies on pandemics. And also sort of a caveat to that is we have another order called hazardous materials, and that talks about police officers dealing with hazardous materials because we deal with those every single day. And those are man-made hazardous materials and bodily hazardous materials, which is somewhat related to COVID. So there's all kinds of policies and procedures in place on hazardous materials. You haven't seen that because it exists, but it wasn't in the list. As far as the other question, I think from Sally on feedback from internal affairs investigations, I thought it was included in the pamphlet. If it's not, I will make a note and we will include it in the pamphlet. But if you read all of General Order 211, it specifically says that somebody, usually it's me, will write a letter to the complainant and advise the complainant of the final outcome of their complaint. That's key because we don't want it to fall into that black hole you mentioned, and we don't want people to think that their complaints are either not examined, not reviewed, or not taken seriously. We take every single internal affairs complaint, whether if it's internal, external, or the 3 or 4 other different types of ways we get complaints on officers. In fact, that's a CALEA thing. The CALEA requires us, and we have standards in place that says that people who make complaints against the police need to be formally or informally notified, but they still need to be notified on the outcome of the complaint. And I think that's the list, unless there was something else there I missed.
The last one was just understanding a little bit more about, what would necessitate a firing or a hiring or dismissal or disciplinary action. We just didn't get that included. I saw it was there, but I was just wondering about that. And also, I know that you all had a meeting. I don't know all of the outcome of that, but I did want to mention, since the chief is here, I don't know if you guys included in the list that I gave you were thank yous that we received from the feedback from the public as well. So I just hope that Chief, that we also received a lot of thank yous along with ideas and questions. So I just wanted to point that out. And if you didn't receive them, I'll send them along.
Thank you. Yeah, I did not pass those along, but feel free. I tried to just narrow down the list as much as I could for the chief. Okay, so are we good with the discussion on this policy? So we're kind of just going along and changing topics. So the next one is use of force. And we have 4 different policies that are available on our website. So I thought we would talk about them kind of all in one section. So this is the use of force section. Does anyone have any topics or comments about these policies? And I think Ryan's on the phone. I don't know if you can, I don't know how the phone works, if you can raise your hand or speak still.
Yep. Sure.
Oh, great. Okay, just checking.
Perfect. Actually, I have a couple questions based on use of force. Kind of what we mentioned in the last meeting, and like everyone said, thank you, Chief, for being on the line here with us and taking your time tonight. One of the things that got brought up in the last meeting based on use of force was some of the talk about when either mental health services or outside agencies get brought in. Because I'm on my phone here, our Spectrum internet is out, so I apologize. I don't have the PDF in front of me. But one of the sections of, I think it was in section 4 and then another subsection, it talked about related agencies within Onondaga County that could be called in the case of use of force as it pertained to a case of mental illness, or officers identifying somebody they were in contact with that may have signs of mental illness, and then listed a number of agencies that could be called upon in that case. I wondered how that kind of gets drilled down, because I'm sure an officer in that position is already at a high stress level and is already trying to assess the situation as they see it, especially on one. What resources are in place for them to call a central communications person to be able to call upon any of those resources within the county or an outside agency in that situation? Is that something that maybe you could elaborate on for us?
Do you want to answer that?
Yes, I think I understand the question. I took some notes. So, I guess I'm not sure where you want me to go with this, but I'm kind of stuck on resources. So we contract with a number of resources within Onondaga County. We're actually very lucky to be in Onondaga County because it's a very progressive county. There's a lot of resources that are available to folks that need help. We have a contract currently with an organization called Liberty Resources, and they deal with all kinds of conflict resolution, specifically in folks that are suffering from mental illness. We also have a really close relationship with county mental health services, and they work sometimes directly with the state of New York under state mental health, as well as CPEP, if you're familiar with that. It's out of St. Joseph's Hospital. That's an outstanding service that is provided to us. So we're able to get people assistance, professional assistance, medical professional assistance through all of those organizations. We train quite frequently on emotionally disturbed persons that are having issues, and there's probably like 5 or 6 other organizations within the county that I can't think of right now that we utilize in order to get these folks assistance. In addition to that, we have the mobile crisis intervention team. They're not as available as we would like. A lot of times when we deal with these issues, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they're just not available at 3 o'clock in the morning. But we have the availability to call out the mobile evaluation team at a moment's notice, and I think they're out of CPEP. And lastly, Manlius Police Department is one of maybe 3 organizations in Onondaga County that started a crisis intervention team training program. We made what we call a one-mind pledge through the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And what it is we pledged as an organization to have at least 20% of our workforce trained in crisis intervention training and 100% of our workforce trained in mental health first aid. And that allows our officers a lot of skills and training in order to identify somebody who's in crisis. So that's really important. We take that real seriously because unfortunately over the last 2 or 3 years, we're experiencing a lot of folks that are in crisis at various levels. Well, if it's mental health or drug abuse, or a lot of times it's both. So when it comes to use of force, if we have to protect ourselves or others, we use the force that's dictated through New York State Penal Law, Article 35, which talks about the justified minimal level of force that's utilized to take somebody under control. We train on that every single year. Our officers know it like the back of their hand, because if they didn't, my 11.5-foot size boot would be up their backside.
I agree with all that.
There's 3 things that gets a police department in trouble, and that is false arrest, you know, discrimination, and probably the third is use of force. It's huge. So we do a ton of training on use of force, and we're going beyond that with our CIT program, which I think is really important, specifically with people that are in crisis. Did that answer your question, Ryan?
Definitely, Chief. Yeah, no, you know, I'm kind of the broken record on anything recorded or on social media. The more the information we can get out to the public. So your response was great, and CPAC is phenomenal through St. Joe's. So if you guys have that, and I know that's a 24/7 resource that you can always reach out to if your officers have access to that, that's a phenomenal resource. So again, I know for a lot of us, our questions are more to just kind of fish out the information, because I know a lot of people will be looking into this and looking back at the recordings. So thank you for all your time and your information on that. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Jim?
So thank you, Chief. And I'm looking at what you gave us with Kalia. I'm going to be the data guy tonight, I guess. And it's very clear to me that under use of force, there's very little of it that's required in the town. There's one term that I'd like to understand, and that's a custodial arrest. I presume that's all other arrests other than something with a use of force. I just don't, what does that term mean?
New York State has various laws that we follow on a daily basis. Some arrests are considered custodial, and some arrests are considered non-custodial. Non-custodial arrest is basically you don't put your hands on somebody and you give them an appearance ticket if there is a chargeable offense.
Okay.
Custodial arrest means that we physically take somebody into custody.
Okay. All right. And in the table that we've got, they don't talk about those non-custodial arrests. They just talk about custodial arrests and use of force arrests. And, you know, in general, it's like maybe, you know, 10 in 600. It's a really small number across them all. And while there is race and ethnicity data, there's so few that it doesn't really make any sense to try and say what's going on here. There's like 2, you know, so it's a real hard, I would be hard pressed to say we can draw some significance from the fact that this happened twice in a year. That doesn't seem to make sense to me. And I also notice that the total total complaints for use of force is usually 0 or 1. So it seems as though that's also going very well. Is there, how would we, but since there's these non-custodial arrests, I guess what I'm wondering is there a way of casting that even more clearly for the population to say, look, there were not 600 people arrested, but there were, if you had the non-custodial arrests, there were another 1,000, whatever it is, and see, this is the number of times we're resorting to force is like a 0.1% of that. Just curious.
I'm not exactly sure what your question is, but the data you're looking at is use of force.
Right, yeah.
That's when we use force, which
Right.
would clearly be a custodial arrest.
Right.
You wouldn't use force on a non-custodial
No,
arrest.
no.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
just saying, is there a way of knowing the total number of arrests, custodial and non-custodial, so we can put that number of use of force, it's even the smaller part of all arrests if we knew the total number?
I guess it could be, but I think the main concern really is the use of force. That's one of the 4 elements that we're trying to review in this
Yep.
committee, is my understanding is, you know, the deployment or the strategies or the practices of the police department as related to the use of force. And I can tell you that, I know you're a data guy, right? But the town of Manlius Police Department responds on average to about 23,000 calls a year.
Okay,
That's in our annual report, right?
Yeah.
So that's at least 23,000 contacts every single year. So out of 23,000 contacts, we average between 12 and 15 use of force
A year.
incidents.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a great number. I just want to be able to cast it in the proper light. That's all. Yeah.
Yep. Understood.
Thank you.
Any other comments on use of force? Bill?
Well, I've got some general statements.
Yep.
Chief, it's always a pleasure to see you, and what I'm going to read is something you're already familiar with. The Greater Manlius Police Appreciation Coalition was formed by a number of concerned citizens of the town of Manlius. The purpose of the coalition is to express our support for the town of Manlius Police Department and the services they provide to the community, as well as other law enforcement entities throughout central New York. The town is very fortunate to have a department which is recognized by so many for its outstanding service. In the last few months, there have been several events around the country that have put focus on police departments and law enforcement in general. These events have shown how important it is to have professional department, which continuously looks to improve and incorporate new processes and standards. We are lucky to have such a department in the town of Manlius. Unfortunately, voices calling for sensible reforms have sometimes been drowned out by people who demean law enforcement and threaten to defund the police, which the GMPC, the General Manlius Police Appreciation Coalition, believes is the opposite of what should be happening. In these critical times, communities should be focusing on increasing training and support, not removing it. Unfortunately, these detractors have also succeeded in damaging morale and sense of mission for many police departments across the country. You'll see mass resignations, unfortunately. It's vitally important at this time for our community to show the town of Manlius Police Department that we support them and their mission. That committee was formed and there was a demonstration, an appreciation day, September 26th. I don't know if anyone else other than the chief was able to attend that. The committee was Rich Rossetti, Bill Brazil, Mayor Manoa, Tim McCarthy, John Loeffler, Mark Levine, Tom Egelman, and myself. In looking at the executive order, the spotlight is entirely on LEOs, law enforcement officers, when it should be shared, in my opinion, that what are the public's responsibilities? You know, we before we unjustly excoriate our police departments, not necessarily Manlius, because we're very blessed. Why is force necessary? And the answer is because people resist arrest. Of the myriad of incidents all over the country, police don't start the use of force. It's because somebody just is non-compliant or resists arrest. Notwithstanding the atrocities that, and a minority of atrocities, but any of them is not good, and that's demeaning to every good law enforcement person. And they hate it just as much as anything else. But to brand the whole thing, and as I said, unjustly excoriate the officers, men and women in blue, because of some bad apples, is abominable, and I get it. So that's a general statement, and the laws are made by whom? Not law enforcement. They're made by legislators. So if the law is unjust, change the law. Just a few statements, and I think we ought to not only put the spotlight on law enforcement, but what are the duties and responsibilities of the citizenry to behave so the use of force is not necessary. And I don't see people talking up for that. The politicians don't. It's unfairly biased, and it's not. It's just obey the law, don't resist.
So thank you so much, Bill. I do understand your comments, and John and I were at that event. But as we were talking, right, I mean, we've already seen the numbers. The town of Manlius police rarely, right, their numbers, they don't use force when they arrest people. Like there's only 10 to 15 incidents per year. So, but we still need to do our job. And our job is basically to bring the community in, to have that conversation, to get people, I mean, people are interested right now, and to have this conversation to educate the public on what our police department is doing. I think that that's all positive, that's all good. And we just want to understand more, and that's what we're doing. But thank you so much for your comments. Does anyone else have anything? Tony?
Thank you. I wanted to touch back a little bit on what Jim spoke about, and I wanted to make sure that I understood it as he was raising the question. With the statistical data that you were pulling, I think Chief was actually started to answer that question. As Chief put, it was 23,000 calls a year. So basically, I think what Jim was asking is if we can compile that data to really show the public the small amount of times that the Manlius police actually even had to use a force out of the total number of calls that they had. So I think that's where he was going. And I think Chief definitely basically was headed right down that road, answering that question by saying, you know, usually on annual is 23,000 calls. Out of that 23,000 calls, I think what Jim was looking for is out of that 23,000, how many were the two types of arrest, and out of that number, how many times was the use of force? And I think with that information, looking at the small, minuscule number of times that the police had to use of force, I think getting that to public will show whatever, you know, how the Manlius Police Department has been trained, how they're responding to calls, the way they respond, and all their training culminate into a situation or situations where they barely have to make an arrest, and when they do make arrests and it does culminate in the use of force, it's so minuscule that you look at the data within that and it's probably going to show even more if you dig down into it. This is why they had to use of force, but I guess the way they approach the public and the way they utilize their training and everything that flows into the Manlius Police Department shows why they have such a small amount of incidences where they have to use of force. So I think grabbing all the information is what Jim was asking, and we can put that to the public to really highlight those instances. Also, to go off of what Bill said, is it's a perfect example of exactly what's going on in the country, which is one of the things I raised when we first met as to why I joined, and it was to really work with our police department to improve where we can improve and to get information out to the public, but at the same time to not basically roll them into a box with the rest of the country, because the Manlius Police Department is the Manlius Police Department. It's not the Syracuse Police Department. It's not, you know, the Michigan Police Department. It's ours, and to really highlight that. Because I think we all know why we're here, is because it is those particular incidences where someone has gone outside, above, and beyond what the badge stands for and what they've been trained to do, and use excessive use of force, and it ends up into a tragedy. But you can't take, like Bill said, you can't basically look at those bad apples and say this is everybody, because it's not. Because that can happen in any organization, whether it's police, whether it's the military, whether it's someone working at Wegmans. You can't say every Wegmans is horrible because you had one bad manager or some bad employees at the DeWitt Wegmans. So the main thing, the focus is here is definitely no one's, you know, villainizing. Well, I guess they are, but you look at two sides of the same coin. You have those that are standing behind the police force and thinks that defunding police is the most ridiculous thing in the world, but they're still working with the police departments to bring about reform, to improve things. And you have the others that are just basically taking things to a whole nother level that it doesn't need to be taken to. So just wanted to make sure that we stayed on track with that, and that what we're doing here is the other side, where we're working with our police force to improve upon anything that we can improve upon and get that information out to the public, so we know that what the Manlius Police Department is doing and supporting our Manlius Police Department. And hopefully this rolls on to a bigger thing, and it can get out there and the work can get spread through the community to other communities, and they can start rolling in the same direction to really get things hunkered down and the way they're supposed to be.
Thank you. Well said. I know we're still talking about use of force, but I would like to move on, if that's okay. Because the next one is, the next order that we will look at is preventing the bias policing and the perceptions of bias. So I thought that that would be a good time to talk about that, but at the same time, continue the discussion, okay? Okay, so I don't know if Jim or Christine, if you wanted to, Christine, okay.
Okay, well, I just wanted to make the point that I could not agree more with Tony, and it was just so eloquently said, and it's in my heart, what you just said. And it's like I sit here on eggshells, like concerned that that is the perception, that the perception is that that we don't see the Manlius Police Department as unique and different. And like, and I just want to say that it's so nerve-wracking to have these conversations, because it seems like just even inherently in having the conversation that there's a way of critical, criticizing. But for me, I could listen to the chief all night because I feel empowered by the information. And Nadine also has unique information to share, and knowledge for a community is power. So, and what Bill said, understanding all of these things is what will help us. I guess all I'm saying about I feel like honored to be able to work on this and see if there is anything that we can improve, because I'm starting to wonder if there is sometimes in these discussions, but to be a part of that is really important, to have these conversations. And I hope that we're able to bring some unique ideas to a department that's already on top of so many things. So that's all I want to say.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'll be brief. I don't think this is a for or against thing. I don't think people are taking sides. I think that's our whole job, is to come in and ask questions so that we can inform. And the best thing to do is to shine a light on something. And if it's good, you'll show it, rather than saying shining a light is bad because you're implying a problem. No, I don't think any of us are here for that purpose. But if we don't ask good questions, people will say, oh, you're just rubber stamping something and you never really looked. So I have every confidence that there's going to be a great result here. And I just want to make sure that we're able to, at the end of the day, say, yeah, we asked a lot of good questions. We got a lot of good answers. And now we can stand by. It's not just an emotional thing, but we've looked, and yeah, it's good. But we can't do that if we look at it, we're implying that it's bad. We're not. We're just looking. That's all.
So I do want to oh, John, go ahead, John.
Well, I just wanted to say, I will admit, sitting down to read these policies was a bit of a bear, and I definitely had to revisit them a couple times. Even just trying to keep track of, I think one of the ones was 15 pages long. But I think what's good is we're having a good conversation about these policies, and maybe we don't actually have any kind of suggested changes or anything, but one, it's giving us a lot of information on how these things operate. And we can always revisit the policies later on. Maybe, that's why I sent out those emails to kind of form those little breakout groups, because, for us to sit down and go, well, in section D, part F, I really think it should be said this way. I don't think we're going to have any of that. But, the policy review is to kind of build that groundwork so that, the complaint process, subgroup now knows. We know exactly how that whole process is laid out. We see the forward-facing pamphlet. I have something here, about, a suggested change to that pamphlet. And at the end of the day, let's not forget the executive order wanted us to review these policies. It didn't necessarily say make changes. Reviewing them is what's important. And I think it's going to inform, I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is the citizen education group, to see what ideas we come up with, because, I think even just saying like, hey, these policies are pretty thorough. And if you look at our use of force, it's very low. So, being able to kind of wrap those things together. But I just want to say, like, I thought some really insightful questions so far. And I think this conversation is going pretty well.
Thank you. So I just want to check in with Juliana or Dominique. I can't see you, so I don't know if you guys have any questions or comments.
I'm just taking everything in at the moment. I'm here though.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm here
Julianne?
too, and I don't know that I can add anything additional to the depth and breadth of what others have shared, so I don't want to be duplicative.
Okay. Thank you. So any thoughts on the preventing bias policing, this general order? This one is a little...
If I may chime in, I
What's
think
the
it's good
number?
for the public just to know kind of what the stance of the Manlius Police Department is. And I think that's been a little bit part of the issue, is just getting the information out there and being as transparent as possible, because the police chief, and again, Chief, thank you for spending your time with us, but I think a lot of the public sometimes doesn't know exactly where the policies align and how transparent the police department is willing to be with the public. And if there was any, at least from my perception, I could be wrong, but from my 2 cents, it's just letting the public know exactly where the police department kind of aligns with everything. I think that would solve any of the existing issues that are kind of already out there. I know it's not 100% resolution with everything, but I think that would help a lot of people, just being transparent on social media, transparent via the email group, and transparent in some of the, I know we can't do the Citizen Academy the way we used to be able to do it, as far as being one-on-one with the officers and doing ride-alongs and everything else, but trying to find some sort of medium to let people know what a great job the police department is doing and what the policies are in place. I think that would form a lot of goodwill with everyone in the town. At least that's my take from it. I'm a big marketing guy, so I think anything that we can do to project that message out to folks in the community, that's always a great thing. So that's my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. Tony?
I think one thing that's going to go along well with this, which everybody knows, is definitely getting the information out there. That's going to definitely help change perceptions. I think spreading the word. I think, Elaine, when you said the briefing is going to be taking place, is that next week?
Yes, next Thursday. I think that's going to be really great.
Yeah, I think, with us being here, spreading that word out to people that we know and having them spread it out and have as many people tune in as possible to be a part of that and really see the force speak on a lot of these matters is going to get information out there. And hopefully the more we learn about policies, we can educate people even more to where they'll actually be able to, or not feel that they're unwelcome or even be afraid to attend a lot of the events that the Manlius Police Department puts on to display their stance on bias, because they want to interact. They jump at the chance to interact with the community, and by having individuals interact with the police officers, out in the community, they'll see and get a chance to know them, understand their personalities. I think it was just a few weeks ago that Manlius police officers were in near the Manoa Fire Department in East Syracuse doing, seatbelt checks and interacting there. And even though our seatbelts are good to go, just watching my kids from afar notice that it's Officer Phillip, it's Officer Sparks, and they just literally just went to go up so they could say hi, because they recognize police officers because they interact with them so many times in the past, going to the the Halloween nights that were held at the police department and you know, at school events that they jump at. So I think the more we get people informed about the police department, get them tuned into things, they'll start to take advantage and interact in those instances and get a chance to know the police officers, and that will start to change the perception of bias right there. It's all about education and getting the word out, which is definitely what we're here to do.
I think, Tony, you're 100% right. And for the opposite way too, the police will know their citizens, and you know, that will help everything. Every understanding of, you know, this person, you know, maybe they're having a bad day and how they react and how they talk and do things. So I think that's really great. And another thing I was thinking about the other day, I was watching a film and the cops were out on the street, like walking, patrolling like that way. I don't know if that's possible or anything like that, but like that just brought up like getting to know your community, you know, being out there, wanting to invest in your citizens, and then your citizens will want to invest in you. So I think that's a really great point that you made.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm putting something in the chat. So that's oh, John just did it too. We're in sync. Okay, so that's the Facebook event for next week presentation. So share that, invite everyone. We're looking forward to it. So does everyone want to move on to the traffic?
Oh, I thought we were going to do the bias.
Yes, we can do that. That one's the 248. Yeah.
248.
248. Okay. Any comments on that?
So I have a comment that's more of a, I guess, really more of a question that I don't think can be answered with policy. So, you know, this looks great to me. This is saying all the things that I would hope a policy would say. We don't want to do this. This is not a good thing to do, and all the reasons for it. So, great. We do know that people who are worried about being profiled are likely to be hypersensitive, right? In encounters with the police. And so I would expect as a police officer, if I were a police officer, I want to be cognizant of that so that I don't, you know, make them so anxious that they do something they shouldn't do. And I don't know how you reduce that to policy. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that's a policy you do, but I'm wondering how that plays out, because it seemed to be just for the police officers' safety and you know, their well-being. You've got to expect that some people, because of their race, are going to be a little more skittish when they're being pulled over. So it's more of a question about practice than policy.
Elaine, I'm not sure if you want me to respond to that. I mean, I can. Like I said, I'm doing a lot of listening, so you got to let me know if you want me to address
I'd
something.
like to know.
I wasn't sure. Like, yeah.
I'm a simple man. I'm not quite sure what the question is, but I can tell you that, you know, the policy is very strict. It's in line with federal and state standards. We do training every single year with our officers to let them know about you know, culture and perception and ethics and all of those things that are all sort of intertwined. And I think that the issue that you're bringing up, I mean, we train as best as we can, and our officers are very much aware of not only what they're doing and how that affects people, but they're also very much aware of the prohibitions associated with the bias policing policy. So other than training and collecting data and letting our folks know, I think what you're referring to, Jim, is the perception.
Right.
And I mean, this group was convened in order to address a review of a comprehensive review of our policy, and with a goal, like Tony said earlier, for recommendations or plans for improvement. So I'm not sure how we're going to improve other than training, which we already do, on the perception that's out there, other than folks understanding a difference between local and national issues, and examining what they see on the news every night and what's really happening locally in the town of Manlius.
Right, right.
Nadine.
I'm going to speak up for the chief here because this is 10 years ago. It's been a long time. But I was interpreting Jim's question as, how do we make sure the officers are comfortable and concerned and understand the perception? And I can tell you that the training back 10 years ago that I believe it was Lieutenant Kroll was in charge of was intense, and it was as an officer, I rather thought it was sometimes very annoying. But it was always very targeted. So one year, and this is just what I remember off the top of my head, we were trying to convince officers that pursuits were bad. Like, pursuits are bad, don't get in a pursuit. And a lot of the old time officers were not happy with that. They were like, pursuits are cool. And I believe it was Mike who brought in a person who had lost a child to a police pursuit. And I can tell you there wasn't an unaffected officer in that room when that person was done talking. I know that the police department's training, also because I work at the Town of DeWitt Police Department, they bring in guest speakers a lot. Like when they talk about mental health training, it's not taught by officers, it's taught by outsiders oftentimes. So a lot of times Mike will bring in people from the community to talk about these things. So I think, Jim, that's what you were asking, was how do we convey this to the officers? I think a lot of times it's really well done that they have somebody else come in and talk to the officers about, how, I'm never going to understand what a person of color feels when I pull them over. Like, that's not something I'm going to understand. So we need to engage people from our community, to come in and talk to us and tell us what it feels like and what they've been through. And I think that is something that is happening, will be happening. I'm not sure, but I think that that's a good way to kind of go forward with training, is look at it from maybe training shouldn't always be taught by insiders, but outsiders too. Right. And I know that the police department is doing that. So I think they are. Am I correct, Chief?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, recently, I received a complaint from one of our citizens, and he was concerned because he thought that he was getting stopped a lot by the police because of the color of his skin. And I immediately drove to his house, and people thought, are you nuts for doing this? I'm like, no, this is my job. So I drove to his house, and we had an awesome conversation on his front porch, and he told me his concerns, and I listened. And I asked him if he would come in and be willing to teach our officers on what that feels like and his perception of what that felt like. Apparently, I wasn't as convincing as I thought I should be, because he didn't want to come in, but at the same time, it was a voluntary gig, right? So, so yeah, we're always doing outreach in various aspects to include that topic, and I would always welcome outside folks to come in. We just had a meeting today on our 2021 in-service training program, and that was a topic that came up. And our committee on training indicated that they would really love to see somebody come in 2021 and talk about mental health. And right now there's a lot of help on mental health, which is good. So we're going to be reaching out to some of our resources to do that. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it certainly reinforces, I think, what Nadine said.
No, and like I said, I don't think there's I couldn't see any problem with the policy. I'm just curious about how you manage it, because it's got to be a challenge. That's all I'm thinking. Yep.
So this is really good to know too. And then I think if we can just kind of incorporate, like when you are doing training or you're having a guest speaker, to inform everyone, saying, hey, our offers are taking place in this training. It would be just great to know, to have that information coming.
Yeah, well, and that kind of goes back to the comments that Ryan made, which I really appreciate. I'm not sure if we lost him. I'm not sure if he's still here or not, but I think it's a great idea to specifically publish our general order on bias policing. And because I had a comment, I don't know, 3 weeks ago about somebody who had a concern about, you know, bias policing, and I literally cut and paste that section of our policy that says that, you know, enforcing the law is strictly prohibited and will result in termination if I see it take place.
Sure.
And that was hopefully a good sound statement to make in that regard. And maybe folks don't understand that we have a policy in place on that. And maybe putting that on the website or certainly on our social media and talk about things like community policing, all great ideas. But at the same time, the community has to trust me a little bit, just a little bit, right? I went through a pretty strict selection process, and I can tell you that the town board put me through the ringer to make sure that they had the best police chief in Onondaga County. And I'm not trying to toot my horn, and I would never do that, but the town board made sure that they had the right person in place. And you know what? If I'm not the right person for the job, I said to them at the time, I'm like, if I'm not doing a good job, let me know, and I'll walk down the road. It's not an issue, you know. I mean, but you know, a little bit of trust has to be associated with that as well. Because I can tell you that if I'm messing up, the town board will let me know, and if they need to, they will let me go, right? And that's a bad on me, right? And I understand that, and that's part of the process.
Can I ask a question real quick? I feel like we're back to the very initial thing that we started out with, which is community engagement. You know, I mean, I think we're all coming down to, I mean, I understand we're going to go through piece by piece the workbook, and we should. But I feel like this is so much of what I as a citizen needed for my own, just for myself. And I'm extrapolating that this might be at least a piece of what other citizens need. And it's not for a lack of trust, it's for a lack of knowledge. And so many things have happened that it's so nice to have this conversation. Like I want to know our police officers and know what they're up to and who they are and what they're doing. And the fact that we have the chief here is amazing, because I know you guys are busy. And so it just, I think I was wondering about, just quick, the coffee talk. If we, like he said earlier, if we can find a hybrid of maybe not in-person citizen training, but something in the middle where we also get to still learn, like the Citizens Academy, something. And I think you should have a podcast. I've already said that. I really think that's needed. Thanks.
So before we continue, I was wondering, go ahead.
I was going to ask a question, but Elaine, if you're wanting to switch gears, I will respect the time.
No, I was going to completely derail us, so please go ahead.
I know we've talked about how thick the policy book is for the police department, and I wonder if there's like any part of it that can be shared, right? Like just when I think about like how the each of the documents that we received, I know it's just a small portion of the thick governing book, but is there a way in which we can share like the policy, like the bullet point 3 on each of them, like what the actual policy is around these, so that just to know that they exist, right? I think even just knowing that, like, obviously you would assume as a regular citizen that the police is governed by policies, et cetera, but like to know like, oh, they're there and this is, and I'm aware of what the policies are, how we implement it, operationalize it, all of that stuff, I don't think needs to be for public consumption. But I wonder, and no one may ever click on the link to even look at it, right? But even to say like, hey, it's publicly available, that anyone can access our policy, like the actual policy, just that paragraph for each of our guiding documents. I think that's something to just say like, hey, you have access to it, right? And then if there's questions, then we can have these public forums and these other engagement opportunities. But just to have access to them, I think is something that could get us, make some headway, I think, in bridging that gap.
Yeah, that would be great too. And then like what we said before, we don't know what we don't know. And if we know, the policies of what our police officers are supposed to be doing, it brings us into that process. It gives us that knowledge, and hopefully we can all help each other. So I think that's a good point. So anyone else have any? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a
Chief.
quick comment on that. And again,
Mhm.
I don't want to consume all the time. And I said I was going to do listening, and I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. But so that was a great suggestion. And in fact, there's one of our citizens that has been hounding me for quite a while on publishing our policies. And then finally, we had a conversation, and I said, I can't really publish all of the policies because they include certain things that I really can't allow the public to know. Like, and the example I provided was, if I publish our exact policy on how we respond to a bank robbery, then all the bank robbers would know exactly how we respond to a robbery. Now that's a silly example, but it's a reality. So I'm certainly not opposed to publishing certain policies, like what I said earlier on bias-based policing. That's a policy. There's no secrets in that one. It's not going to, in fact, I'm proud of that one. I'm proud of 95. I'm proud of all of our policies, but that's one that I would publish in a heartbeat. So, but the problem with that is, and of course there's two town councilors here that are on the line, is I need resources to be able to go through our 155 policies and redact what needs to be redacted in the interest of public safety, and then the rest of it can be published. And I'd be happy to do that, but I don't have the resources, the ability to do that. John mentioned going through 5 or 6 policies, and it's a bear. When I first became chief, I went through every single page on every single policy. It took me a while, and there was a lot of red eyes and late nights, but I got through it. And so I have to have the resources and the ability to have somebody go through every page, and that somebody would probably be me, and redact what needs to be redacted and then publish the rest. And I'm happy to do that. I'm not opposed to doing that, but that's a lot of work. And right now I have a lot on my plate, and I'm not trying to make excuses because it sounds like an excuse, right? But I have to look at every day on how many resources do I have, how much work do I have, and how do I manage the two?
So, I guess, Chief, to that point, that would not be a great use of resources. Oftentimes at work, we think about the cost per hour of the meeting of the people doing that work. And so that would not be a good use of our resources as a town to have you be the one going through those policies, which is why I suggested just like the section that said policy in that one paragraph. Another I think, way to accomplish maybe what I'm suggesting is, even if it was just an index of the policies that exist, and maybe there isn't any like actual information, but like, hey, these are the types of policies that govern the way we do business. If you want to learn more, how about you join the Citizens Police Academy? It's almost like a promo, right? Like, if you want to learn more, get more involved. And if there are policies that we have that are fine to be published, and put them out there. Otherwise, just say, like, just know that they exist. You want to learn more, like contact the town council, like all the other ways they can be involved in local governance, I think. Because there's some responsibility that has to be put on the citizen.
No, I think that's an outstanding idea, and thank you so much for that. I already sent Councilor Deere our index, the table of contents, if you will.
Yeah, everyone in the group has the table of content.
Yeah.
Just so that, like, there a policy on this. But I think I think what we may have officially arrived at, one of the first suggestions that would be in that plan, is the job of this committee is not to now do that work. It's to make that suggestion. So I think we've got a great first thing of, to suggest to the town board to allocate resources to allow for an assessment of our complete policy and work towards publishing what, as maybe not as much as we could, but enough to give people, confidence in, there are policies for all these things. I think even just that table of contents would be a great first step. But to, and then, whenever we find a policy we can publish, let's publish it. I think that's a great idea. And I know Bill has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate the chief being here. And one of my questions was, there's bias on a whole host of levels in certain communities around the country. I think Manlius, the police department, has shown a great response with use of force. Looking at the numbers, we are a leader. One of the questions I have is, in the neighborhood that I live in, I've seen, people of color sometimes walking in the neighborhood, and calls get made of suspicious behavior. How is that handled by the police, and how can we educate more the constituents on what is suspicious behavior?
That's a good question. Chief, do you have any?
I have two thoughts on that, Bill. It's a good question, and the first thing is that New York State just passed a law recently that indicated that if you call the police and it has absolutely no substance to the call, other than the fact that the person was dark-skinned or of a certain, it's not even related to dark skin. It's related to any, ethnicity or bias in any way. That is now illegal in New York State. And that's great, right? It's called reporting a false incident. But most importantly to that is, and I don't expect the panel to know this, and probably Nadine knows it because she's probably heard me drum it into her brain all those years, but in New York State, and it's the only state in the entire country, we have a thing called levels of Du Bois. And yeah, see Nadine's reaction. So in New York State, and you may not understand this, but I'll try to briefly explain it to you. It's based on a case called involving an individual named Du Bois, and he was approached by the police, and the New York State Court of Appeals, which is the highest state in the state of New York, came up with 4 levels of Du Bois. And the police cannot even approach an individual on the street without a certain articulable fact or observable, articulable circumstances to even approach that individual and even ask them a question. And the questions go from low level of inquiry all the way up to the most accusatory level where an arrest could be effected. And I can tell you, every single Manlius police officer knows the levels of Du Bois. They probably dream about them because I drill them into their brains every single time I do legal updates training every single year. So in addition to the law dictating that thing is, that process is illegal, our officers firmly know when they can approach somebody and when they can't approach somebody. And those levels of Du Bois are also based on like I said, articulable facts. And an articulable fact is not walking in a neighborhood with dark skin. So it may be a perception of a problem, but I can tell you in Manlius, it's not a problem. And there's many factors that are associated with making sure that that's not a problem.
That is so great to hear. Thank you.
I'm just going to make a quick comment on this. Chief Kroll will drive around and he will ask you after you're done with a complaint, what level of Du Bois were you in when you questioned that person? And I will tell you that he's done that to me. And it didn't go well. He's probably flashing back at this moment. But the reality of it is he's not talking, he's not lying to you. That moment when he just said that, my whole body went, ugh, because he does every single year. I went to the police academy with Chief Kroll, and he's been doing this since back then. So this is his shtick. He loves this. He talks about it. He trains it. He teaches it. The chief doesn't have to teach in-service training, and he does. So this is not him just talking to talk. This is, if anybody dreams about Du Bois, it's Chief Kroll.
Sounds like he's walking the walk. Thank you.
Yes.
Jim?
Just a quick one. Chief, I really understand the problem of unfunded mandates, which is what I would classified one of the challenges is. I think if I had to pick one policy that you could publish in full, it would be this one of the bias profiling, because I think that's where the magnet is. That's where everybody's, drawn to. And if it really is one of those things where you don't have to worry about redacting it, or you have to review it to be sure, but where the likelihood is low, I would say that's low hanging fruit. That would be one that you could publish, and it would do a lot of good for people to say, look, these are the details of how we manage this. We're not just saying we should be good people. We're saying this is how you do it. And I think there'd be a real advantage to that one in particular.
Great. So it is 8 o'clock. So I do want to check in with everyone. This seems to be going well.
Yeah.
So thank you. So I just want to check in. Our next meeting is right now October 29th at 6:30, which is 2 weeks from now. And then we still have a presentation in between that, so we're a little busy. So I want to check in with everyone. Is everyone still okay with that? Our meeting after that right now is after the 29th would be the November 12th. And then any thoughts about the October 29th meeting? We've gotten through a good amount of the policies, and a lot of some of this other conversation can happen in the small groups as well. So any thoughts? Sally. Oh, you're still muted.
There we go. Sorry. Just before we leave, I just have a couple comments. First of all, Chief, greatest support for you. I know I probably express it for all of us here, and everyone has expressed it, but what a job you have, and you do it above and beyond. So thank you for all you do. And Nadine, to have you as part of this, to be able to say, yep, I know that's what he's doing because he did it to me, it lets us all know. And the word that's been kicked around a lot tonight is the word perception. Having been in education and as the administrator, I would hear that over and over again. It's what the community perceives. And how do you change perception? You change it through education. And that's where we're going. And I think we're on the right path. So I just wanted to say that. And Chief, I owe you an apology. The last sentence on that brochure says that you will get back to the complainant. So I'm going to save you that little bit of homework. How's that? So I'm done. So thank you.
Thank you. John.
So one thing I was going to suggest, what might be a better way to structure our next couple meetings is if we were to focus on the 29th of maybe having the breakout groups come back with a little, maybe each one can pick a point person to say like, we talked about this, we had these questions, or we wanted to bring this to the group. That way we can get that ball rolling. And then maybe on the 12th, so that we're not taking up the chiefs every Thursday, maybe on the 12th, we can kind of pick up where we leave this meeting to kind of go through the rest of the policy. And it might be good for all of us because we'll have, the benefit of this meeting plus that presentation that's next week. And then, maybe as we dig into this more, we can either revisit some of these policies, but we'll also be able to, go to the second half of these policies with maybe just a little bit better understanding of the kind of questions that we have or comments, as opposed to, I think we spent a little time learning tonight, which is great. And so maybe if we put some space in between now and the next time, we do one of these very intense sessions, it just might lead to slightly better outcomes.
Although, John, this was an excellent outcome.
Yeah.
I just was wondering about the chat for this. Is our chat reflecting public right now? I just don't know, because there are a couple of suggestions in the chat. I
So
thought,
that chat is just for everybody that's in Zoom. So basically right now, there are 12 people at this meeting, the 11 of us, and one attendee who's been watching the whole time.
okay,
And so anybody, we can all see that. And I was actually going to ask the chief tomorrow if he thought anything on this conversation was maybe not fit for, posting to Facebook. But I don't think that chat would be public either way. And my plan was to just send that chat to everybody after the fact so we can, talk
okay.
about.
I just wanted to make sure, because those were some interesting suggestions as well, but I don't need to take time if it's all going to the chief and all of us too. Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so I heard that we're still good for the 29th, and potentially we'll do our we'll meet in small groups. Is that the plan?
Well, so the only problem with that is everybody is in 2 groups, so we can't actively meet. I didn't look and see if there's, 3 groups that are.
It's not too bad. I looked.
Yeah. So what I was thinking is in these 2 weeks, if the groups could bring, so that way, like, what did the people who were most interested in these things, ideas, suggestions, questions, maybe, like, that way we can kind of regroup and, start kind of working down that path towards that, those suggestions from each of those groups. And it doesn't have to be a 2-hour meeting for that. It
Okay.
could be a shorter one that we then,
Okay.
get ready for policy review again.
Okay. So
Is there a way we can schedule, because we've got 2 weeks to report on what these 2 groups that we're supposed to be in have done. I would just find it helpful if we could pick some times for those first meetings so we can actually, we've got everybody here now. It'd be the easiest way to get it done.
So I had sent those emails to kind of help everybody get in touch, and I don't know if we're maybe that is what we do, is maybe, I'll take a look at the groups and see if we can do maybe 45 minutes of everybody meeting in one group, and then we swap over to a different set of groups. I'll take a look at that over the weekend and see if we can structure it like that. But if there's, we can set up a Zoom call if the smaller groups want to do that. Everyone's got phone numbers and email, so you feel free to start your own email chain. And it's really, it is what you make of it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get everybody into smaller groups so that, one, we had the people who are most focused on those things. And what I find is when you put people in the smaller groups, you'll usually have some person who's like, okay, I'm the leader now, and just takes off with it. So, but if that isn't happening, please let us know and we can help facilitate however it's needed.
okay, so do we want to continue on any other policies tonight, or are we all set? I think we're all set. Well, we're a little early. Yay.
Are we? It's after 8.
It is after 8, but I always don't like to go past 2 hours, and we're under 2 hours, so I'm going to say we're a little early.
Okay.
So thank you again, Chief Kroll, for attending. Your help we can't do this without you. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Do you mind if I add just
yes.
one brief thing, just to let the group know, and it's kind of correlates with what we talked about earlier about having discussions like this and having trust in me. But I keep mentioning this CALEA thing. And so the town councilors know this, but I'll let the rest of the group know. Every 4 years, we go through a reaccreditation process. And we have 2 assessors we don't even know these people. They come from CLIA accredited agencies all throughout the country. And we're going to be going through a virtual on-site assessment. And that's going to start on October 26th. And it'll last for 3 days through October 28th. During that process, we have multiple ways that the public can provide any kind of input, positive or negative, about your police department. The first thing that the public could do is write a letter directly to CLIA in Virginia to talk about the department. The second is there's a phone-in session on the 27th at 1 o'clock. And again, it could be anonymous or otherwise. They may ask your name, but it could be anonymous. And that's a call-in session where folks can provide comment, again, positive or negative about the police department. And then there's also going to be a public hearing, but it's going to be virtual. And that's going to be on the 27th at 3:30. So this public notice was published on the website, our website. It's been posted in every library, and we try to get as many community buildings throughout the town, to include the town hall, with all of those instructions. So I would encourage all of you and your friends and other town residents to please write in if they would like to say either positive or negative things. But this is a great opportunity for not only a policy review process, but to actually hear from the public about their police department. So it's like a shameless little plug for our place. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time tonight.
You've obviously been paying attention, because that's like one of the main things we've been talking about. So I love a shameless plug for anything.
Great. Thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone have a great
Everybody, I'll be in
night.
touch with the groups. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Night.
night.
Good night.
Good night.